So, as the publicity for this panel says, I used to work for Bernie Sanders as his press secretary. And I'll just start off with a small story about that, which is that back in 1991, after his first election to the United States House of Representatives, one of the things that I did was I attended these Sunday evening brainstorming sessions that Sanders held at his home once or twice a month in Burlington. And, you know, Bernie had really an immensely talented team of people, a kind of kitchen cabinet of local Vermonters who came up with the nuts and bolts of his campaign structure, lots of creative advertising ideas, and other election blueprints that made his statewide campaign so successful. These volunteers weren't Washington consultants or even members of his Washington staff, but rather local Vermonters who juggled full-time jobs with a full-time commitment to Bernie's vision. What inspired them and what they emphasized over and over again in these living room meetings was the desire to translate Bernie's electoral success into a mass social movement that would galvanize Vermonters to form a progressive party and implement radical platforms at every level of government. Well, today, Bernie, in his presidential campaign, still hews to the belief that this race is not about him, it's about the rest of us. It's about making a political revolution in this country in which we oust the corporate billionaires and their handmaidens in political office and make government benefit ordinary working Americans. And I think we can all agree, regardless of debating whether inside or outside the Democratic Party, that it's certainly been a remarkable campaign and that it's challenged every assumption. And it's challenged every assumption about what voters want to see in a presidential candidate. And it's certainly inspired thousands of young people to become invested in politics, and many for the first time. But one thing is missing: that elusive political empowerment that was supposed to materialize as a lasting force 30 years ago in Vermont. While the Vermont Progressive Party that grew out of Bernie's victories has had some modest electoral success, the long-hoped-for mass movement never came about. Today, politics in Vermont is much the same as it was 35 years ago. Basic reforms have been few and far between. Many, like single-payer health care, are still dreams, not reality. And of course, in Washington, it's worse than ever. Will the Sanders presidential run make the difference? Will it be what finally crystallizes a broad progressive movement in the United States that outlasts the victory or defeat of a single candidate? Honestly, I don't think so. And not because of anything to do with Bernie, who's put his all into this national presidential campaign. Rather, I think that what's occurred in the 35 years since Sanders' mayoral victory in Burlington points the need to the creation of an entirely new politics, one that's based on organization, very much as you said, but not the kind focused on electing representative politicians to high office, most of whom have shown themselves to be largely unresponsible to the people who vote for them. Instead, it's time to take our cues from the horizontalist movements that have grown around the world over the past decades. These movements understand that if we're going to abolish racism, sexism, and other forms of social and economic oppression, we must address domination and hierarchy and reclaim politics to mean the activity of self-rule that we undertake when we meet face to face to make decisions about our communities. We must create organizations where ordinary people become transformed into political actors in everyday life. These horizontalist movements understand that representative electoral politics is a dead end, and that when we assign decision-making to politicians, no matter how well-intentioned they may be, we degrade the very concept of politics and the rich community life that should support it. The ballot box is the nation-state's iron cage. It's designed precisely to control the body politic, to pacify it, and manipulate it. And the nation-state, inherently violent, hierarchical, and repressive, is the fulcrum of the neoliberal order that is foreclosing on our homes, destroying Black lives, and sucking the life out of our planet. Not only is it impossible to seize its power, we need only to look at the example of the Soviet Union and the history of national liberation movements to see just how undesirable the seizing of state power really is. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that we can't avoid the issue of power altogether, confining ourselves to a politics of resistance. Rather, we must ask ourselves what type of alternative social organization will heal our rift with the natural world and create a society in which truly emancipated, creative human beings can flourish. The answer lies at the level of the community, the municipality, that over and over again has shown itself to be the realm of human freedom. A natural enemy of the nation state, the municipality is the locale where citizens can discuss, debate, and interact on equal footing, where they can realize their potential as active, engaged members of a shared civic life. This ideal of civic virtue is reflected in some of the most transformative moments in history, when citizens have come together in assembly democracies and taken power into their own hands. From the Paris Commune of 1871 to the anarchist collectives of revolutionary Spain, and the list could go on. These institutions of popular power, what Hannah Arendt called the lost treasure of the revolutionary tradition, must become the foundation of our activism. So what does this mean in practice? Well, I'd like to give a little example, which is really to be found someplace far, far from us, and in many ways unexpected, but it's in the territory of Rojava, a swath of northern Syria with a total landmass that's really just about the size of Connecticut. There, the Kurds have established a bottom-up political system of popular assemblies. They've enshrined the values of non-hierarchy, women's liberation, ethnic plurality, religious tolerance, direct democracy, and ecological stewardship, to name just a few of the ideals. Set out in the 96 articles of the Rojava Social Contract. This revolutionary document guarantees all ethnic communities the right to teach and be taught in their own language. It abolishes the death penalty. It mandates that women make up 40% of every electoral body and also serve as co-chairs at every level of government administration. The Rojava Constitution promotes a philosophy of ecological stewardship that guides all decisions about town planning, economics, and agriculture. And most importantly, Rojava is governed by a decentralized political system in which every member of the community can voice his or her opinion in the popular assemblies that decide all communal and economic matters. In Rojava, power flows upwards, with political decisions transmitted via delegates from small localities to larger councils of the town and the region. It's an example of democracy in the truest sense of the word, and its profound human resonance is demonstrated by the fierce commitment we've seen in the men and women fighters of Rojava who defend it. The inspiration for this new politics, according to Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan, comes from the work of my late father, Murray Bookchin, who elaborated these ideas in a series of essays and books, and whereas Öcalan calls it democratic confederalism, Murray called it libertarian municipalism or communalism. Bookchin's communalism represents a vision of assembly-based democracy that is inherently anti-hierarchical and thus the exact opposite of representative democracy. He believed that communalism was not only an end, but a means, a prefigurative strategy that would allow us to educate and organize around ecological, anti-capitalist, and anti-state principles, with social justice and a moral economy blossoming as the logical, rational outcomes of a humanistic approach to society. This politics is being articulated more and more in horizontalist movements around the world. In the factory recuperation politics of Argentina, in the water wars of Bolivia, in the neighborhood councils that comprise the most radical elements of Podemos in Spain, we see people creating new democratic spaces on the local level, a countervailing power that grows to challenge the authority of the nation state. In conclusion, as we reflect on the terrible impact that capitalism is having on the climate, on the air we breathe, the pesticides and the food we eat, and the global impoverishment and suffering of the vast majority of the world's population, as we think about how we can turn our anguish over social and economic injustice, be it in Ferguson, Missouri, or Athens, Greece, from protest into true political transformation, it becomes increasingly clear that we will never achieve the kind of fundamental political change necessary to save the planet and create racial equality, much less a truly free society, just by going to the ballot box. Nor will we reach our goals by simply taking our demands to the street. Large demonstrations and encampments may challenge the authority of the state, but they have not succeeded in usurping it. To do that, we need enduring political institutions that are egalitarian, transparent, fully accountable, and directly democratic. They require time and education and the building of consciousness, but they are our only hope for creating fundamental political change. And I'll close with a couple of lines, just a brief anecdote. David Graeber, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, was speaking with a member of the Kurdish autonomy movement a few months ago while visiting Rojava, and expressed concern about the toll that the Battle of Kobani against ISIS had taken on the Kurdish people, the deaths and displacement and really terrible destruction of virtually the entire city. The Kurdish man standing before him replied, "Don't feel sorry for us. We feel sorry for you. We have our freedom. You don't." If under the most punishing conditions of war, the people of Rojava can create neighborhood groups and councils to address local issues, if they can write a charter of common values and base their politics on that charter, surely we can begin that process in our cities and towns too. Thank you.